What would you do if your 18-month-old child, who had never met a stranger, suddenly drew a perfect portrait of a man you'd never seen before? And what if that same man turned out to be the most powerful CEO in your city? This is the extraordinary, true story of how one mother's world collided with a billionaire's empire in the most unexpected way, changing both their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The November rain drummed against the thin walls of the cramped studio apartment as 24-year-old Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, watching her 18-month-old daughter Emma scribble with broken crayons on the back of an old envelope. The electricity had been shut off 3 days ago, and the only light came from the gray afternoon seeping through the single window that faced the brick wall of the neighboring building. Sarah's fingers were numb from the cold, but she kept them steady as she folded another paper crane from the stack of overdue bills beside her, hoping to distract herself from the gnawing hunger in her stomach. Emma's soft babbling filled the silence as she dragged a red crayon across the paper with the intense concentration that only toddlers possessed. Sarah smiled despite everything, watching her daughter's chubby fingers work with surprising precision. For the past few weeks, Emma had shown an unusual fascination with drawing, though most of her artwork consisted of the typical scribbles and circles that parents everywhere proudly displayed on refrigerators. But today, something was different. Sarah had been surviving on crackers and whatever free samples she could find at the grocery store, saving every morsel of real food for Emma. The baby formula was running dangerously low, and the thought of having to water it down again made Sarah's chest tighten with guilt. She had applied to 17 different jobs in the past month, from cleaning offices at night to stocking shelves at dawn. But every potential employer took one look at Emma in her arms and found reasons why Sarah wouldn't be a good fit. Single. Mothers with toddlers were a liability, they said without saying it directly. The apartment they called home was barely 300 square feet, with a Murphy bed that hadn't worked properly in years, a kitchenette with 2 functioning burners, and a bathroom so small that Sarah had to keep Emma's portable crib in the main room. The rent was 6 weeks overdue, and their landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, had been increasingly aggressive in his demands for payment. Sarah had managed to avoid eviction so far by promising him that her financial aid from the community college would come through any day, but they both knew she was living on borrowed time. Sarah's parents lived on the other side of the country, and while they loved Emma dearly, they were struggling to make ends meet on her father's disability checks and her mother's part-time job at a local library. They sent what they could, usually $20 or $30 tucked into cards with pictures of Emma's grandparents smiling hopefully from their modest living room, but it was never enough to make a real difference. Sarah's pride prevented her from asking for more, knowing that they were already sacrificing to help her. Emma's father, Jason, had disappeared when Sarah was 7 months pregnant, leaving behind only a note saying he wasn't ready to be a father and a pile of credit card debt in both their names. Sarah had spent months trying to track him down, not for reconciliation but for child support, only to discover that he had moved to another state and was working under the table to avoid garnishment. The legal fees to pursue him across state lines were more than Sarah could ever afford, so she had given up and focused on building a life for herself and Emma alone. The community college where Sarah had been studying early childhood education had been understanding about her situation, allowing her to bring Emma to some classes and arranging for her to take others online. But the stress of juggling coursework, job hunting, and caring for a toddler while worrying about money had taken its toll. Sarah's grades had slipped, and she was barely keeping up with the minimum requirements to maintain her financial aid. Some nights, she stayed awake until 3 in the morning working on assignments while Emma slept, only to be awakened an hour later by the baby's cries. As Sarah watched Emma work on her mysterious drawing, she noticed something that made her Breath catch, the scribbles weren't random anymore. There were deliberate lines forming shapes, curves that looked almost intentional. Emma was humming softly to herself, the same tune Sarah had sung to her every night since birth, but her focus was entirely on the paper. Her small tongue poked out in concentration as she reached for a black crayon, adding careful strokes to what was beginning to look like a face. Sarah scooted closer, careful not to disturb Emma's work. The resemblance to an actual human face was remarkable for an 18-month-old. There were two eyes roughly symmetrical, a nose that was more than just a circle, and even the suggestion of a mouth. But what made Sarah's heart race was the detail around the eyes. Emma had drawn what looked like lines extending from the corners, not random marks but deliberate strokes that gave the face a quality of maturity, of someone who had lived and experienced life. Emma reached for a gray crayon and began adding to the hair area, her movements becoming more confident with each stroke. Sarah had seen plenty of toddler artwork in her child development classes, and this was far beyond what most children Emma's age could produce. It wasn't just the technical skill, though that was impressive enough. It was the fact that Emma seemed to be drawing from memory, as if she was looking at someone real and trying to capture their likeness on paper. The apartment was so quiet that Sarah could hear Emma's breathing and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. She thought about the strange dreams Emma had been having lately, waking up in the middle of the night and babbling excitedly about a man she called the nice man. Sarah had assumed they were typical toddler fantasies, the kind of imaginary friends that many children developed. But now, watching Emma draw with such purpose and precision, she wondered if there was something more to it. Sarah's own childhood had been filled with stories from her grandmother about intuition and connections that couldn't be explained by logic. Her grandmother, who had emigrated from Taiwan as a young woman, often spoke about the invisible threads that connected people across time and space. She believed that children, with their minds not yet clouded by skepticism, could sometimes see and feel things that adults missed. Sarah had always taken these stories with a grain of salt, but sitting on the cold floor, watching her daughter create something extraordinary, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Emma suddenly looked up at Sarah, her dark eyes bright with excitement. She pointed at the drawing and said something that sounded like nice man. Though at 18 months her vocabulary was still limited to a few dozen clear words. Sarah nodded encouragingly, not wanting to break the spell of whatever was happening. Emma smiled and returned to her work, adding more details to the face with a confidence that was almost unsettling. The drawing session continued for another 20 minutes, longer than Emma had ever focused on any single activity. Sarah found herself holding her breath as her daughter added finishing touches, using the stub of a blue crayon to color in what were unmistakably eyes. When Emma finally set down the crayon and clapped her hands in satisfaction, Sarah was looking at a portrait that was far more sophisticated than anything she had expected to see from a toddler. The face in the drawing was that of a middle-aged man with kind eyes, silver-touched hair, and a jawline that suggested strength and determination. There was something familiar about the features, though Sarah was certain she had never seen this person before. The eyes in particular seemed to hold a depth of emotion that was remarkable for a child's artwork. They weren't just circles with dots inside them, but carefully shaded ovals with distinct irises and what looked like crow's feet at the corners. Sarah carefully picked up the envelope, studying the drawing from different angles. The proportions were surprisingly accurate, and there was a warmth to the expression that made the face seem almost alive. Emma had somehow managed to capture not just physical features but personality, creating a portrait of someone who looked approachable and trustworthy. It was the kind of face you might see on a company's About Us page, someone who projected competence and compassion in equal measure. Emma crawled over to Sarah and patted the drawing, repeating her nice man phrase with obvious pride. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, marveling at the mystery they had just witnessed. She had read about children prodigies and unusual artistic abilities, but this felt different. It wasn't just that Emma had drawn a face, it was that she had drawn a specific face, someone she seemed to know intimately despite never having met them. The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal toddler activities, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the drawing. She propped it up against the window where she could see it while she fed Emma dinner, played with her wooden blocks, and got her ready for bed. Each time she looked at it, she noticed new details that she had missed before. The way the eyebrows were slightly asymmetrical, the small lines around the mouth that suggested someone who smiled often, the overall composition that somehow conveyed both authority and kindness. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in her crib, Sarah sat at her small table with the drawing spread out before her. She had taken pictures of it with her phone, partly to preserve it, and partly because she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. The images on her phone screen confirmed what she had witnessed earlier. This was not typical toddler artwork. This was a portrait of a real person, drawn with an accuracy and emotional depth that seemed impossible given Emma's age and lack of formal training. Sarah researched child development and artistic abilities until late into the night, reading about savant syndrome and early childhood creativity. Most of what she found described children who were much older than Emma when they began showing exceptional abilities. And even then, their work typically showed technical skill rather than the emotional intelligence that Emma's drawing seemed to possess. There were a few documented cases of very young children producing remarkable artwork, but they were rare and usually accompanied by other developmental differences that Emma didn't exhibit. The more Sarah thought about it, the more convinced she became that the man in the drawing was real. Emma's behavior over the past few weeks, her dreams about the nice man, and now this incredibly detailed portrait all suggested that somehow, in some way that Sarah couldn't understand, her daughter had connected with an actual person. The question was who this person was and why Emma felt drawn to him. Sarah spent the next morning researching everything she could about psychic abilities in children, dream connections, and unexplained phenomena. Most of what she found was either too scientific to be helpful or too mystical to be credible, but there were enough documented cases of unusual connections between people to make her wonder if Emma's experience might be more common than she had initially thought. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Children, according to several sources, were more open to experiences that adults dismissed or rationalized away. The practical side of Sarah's mind told her that she was reading too much into what was probably just an unusually good drawing by a talented child. But the mother's intuition that had guided her through 18 months of raising Emma alone told her that something significant had happened. The drawing felt important in a way that she couldn't explain, like a message that she was supposed to receive and act upon. By midday, Sarah had made a decision that surprised even her. She was going to try to find the man in the drawing. She had no idea where to start or what she would do if she actually found him, but the certainty that this was what she was supposed to do was overwhelming. Emma had given her a gift, a connection to someone who might be able to help them or who might need their help in return. Either way, Sarah felt compelled to explore the possibility. She started with the most obvious approach, posting the drawing on social media with a caption asking if anyone recognized the person Emma had drawn. She shared it on Facebook, Instagram, and even created a Twitter account to spread it further. Within hours, she had dozens of comments from friends and strangers alike, all marveling at Emma's artistic ability, but none recognizing the face in the drawing. Some suggested that she contact local news stations or art schools, while others recommended showing it to child development specialists. Sarah also decided to take a more direct approach. She dressed Emma in her warmest clothes, bundled the drawing carefully in a plastic bag, and set out to walk through the affluent parts of the city where successful, distinguished-looking men might work or live. It was a long shot, but Sarah had learned to trust her instincts when it came to providing for Emma, and her instincts were telling her to take action. The first stop was the financial district, where glass towers stretched toward the gray November sky, and people in expensive suits moved with the purposeful stride of those who had important places to be. Sarah felt self-conscious pushing Emma's second-hand stroller through the marble lobbies and past the security guards, who eyed them with polite suspicion. She showed the drawing to several receptionists, explaining that her daughter had drawn it and asking if they recognized the person. Most were kind but unhelpful, though a few were intrigued enough by the story to take a closer look. At the third building she visited, a sleek high-rise that housed several investment firms and consulting companies, the security guard was more helpful than most. He studied the drawing carefully, holding it up to the light and examining the details with obvious interest. After a few minutes, he shook his head and handed it back to Sarah, but not before mentioning that the face looked familiar, like someone he might have seen in the business section of the newspaper. This comment sparked a new idea for Sarah. She spent Emma's nap time that afternoon at the public library, searching through back issues of the local business journal and newspaper. She looked at hundreds of photographs of executives, entrepreneurs, and community leaders, comparing each face to Emma's drawing. It was tedious work, made more difficult by Emma's occasional fussing and the librarian's increasingly pointed glances at the clock. But Sarah persisted. After 3 hours of searching, just as she was beginning to think the whole endeavor was hopeless, Sarah turned a page and felt her heart stop. There, in a quarter-page article about local philanthropy, was a photograph that made her hands tremble. The man in the picture was older than the one in Emma's drawing, with more pronounced lines around his eyes and grayer hair, but the fundamental features were unmistakably the same. The kind eyes, the strong jawline, the overall expression of competent warmth, it was him. The article identified him as Michael Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, a manufacturing company that had grown from a small family business into a multi-billion-dollar corporation over the past 30 years. According to the article, Thompson was known for his innovative approach to employee relations and his generous contributions to local charities, particularly those focused on children and education. The photograph had been taken at a fundraising gala where he had donated $500,000 to build a new wing at the Children's Hospital. Sarah read the article 3 times, memorizing every detail about Michael Thompson. He was 52 years old, had built his company from the ground up after inheriting a small manufacturing shop from his father, and was considered one of the most respected business leaders in the region. He had been married for 25 years to his college sweetheart, Linda, and they had 2 grown children who were both involved in the family business. His hobbies included sailing and woodworking, and he was known for personally responding to letters from customers and employees. The article mentioned that Thompson Industries was headquartered in the newest and most impressive building in the financial district, a 40-story tower that Sarah was certain she had walked past earlier that day. The realization that she had been so close to finding him made her pulse quicken with excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow, she decided, she would return to that building with Emma and the drawing. She wasn't sure what she would say or how she would even get past security to meet someone as important as Michael Thompson, but she knew she had to try. As Sarah walked home from the library with Emma drowsing in her stroller, she felt a mixture of anticipation and terror that she hadn't experienced since the day Emma was born. She was about to embark on something that could change their lives forever, though she had no idea whether that change would be positive or catastrophic. All she knew was that Emma had somehow connected with this man across the boundaries of their very different worlds, and that connection felt too important to ignore. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah practiced what she might say to Michael Thompson if she actually managed to meet him. Every approach she considered sounded ridiculous when spoken aloud. How do you explain to a billionaire CEO that Your 18-month-old daughter drew his portrait without ever having seen him? How do you convince someone that's successful and busy to take time out of his schedule to meet with a struggling single mother based on what most people would dismiss as coincidence? Sarah looked at the drawing again, studying the face that had somehow bridged the gap between Emma's world and Michael Thompson's. There was something in those carefully drawn eyes that gave her courage, a suggestion of the kind of person who might be willing to listen to an impossible story and consider the possibility that it might be true. Tomorrow she would find out if her intuition was correct, or if she was about to make the biggest fool of herself in Emma's short life. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of bright winter sunshine that made everything look crisp and full of possibility. Sarah dressed Emma in her best outfit, a red corduroy dress that had been a gift from her parents, and carefully braided her dark hair with ribbons that matched. She herself wore the only professional-looking clothes she owned, a black skirt and white blouse that she had bought for job interviews, and spent extra time on her makeup to hide the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Sarah carefully folded Emma's drawing into a manila envelope along with a copy of the newspaper article about Michael Thompson. She wrote a brief note explaining who they were and why she wanted to meet him, though reading it over, she realized how inadequate words were to convey the magnitude of what had happened. Still, it was better than trying to explain everything to a receptionist who would probably think she was delusional. The Thompson Industries building was even more imposing in the daylight than it had been during her previous visits to the financial district. The glass facade reflected the morning sun like a beacon and the constant stream of well-dressed people. Entering and exiting suggested a level of activity and importance that made Sarah feel small and out of place. She took a deep breath, adjusted Emma's position in her stroller, and approached the main entrance with as much confidence as she could muster. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern architecture, with soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than Sarah would earn in several years. The reception desk was staffed by two impeccably groomed women who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine, and Sarah suddenly felt acutely aware of her second-hand clothes and worn shoes. Emma, however, seemed fascinated by all the shiny surfaces and interesting sounds, babbling happily as she took in the bustling environment. Sarah approached the reception desk with Emma's stroller, her envelope clutched tightly in one hand. The younger of the two receptionists looked up with a polite but somewhat strained smile, the kind reserved for people who clearly didn't belong in such rarefied surroundings. Sarah introduced herself and explained that she needed to speak with Michael Thompson about something involving her daughter, but before she could elaborate, the receptionist was already shaking her head. Mr. Thompson's schedule was completely booked, she explained with practiced efficiency. He had back-to-back meetings all day, and his assistant would need at least 2 weeks' notice to consider adding anyone new to his calendar. If Sarah wanted to submit a business proposal or employment application, there were proper channels for that, and she could find the relevant forms on the company website. The dismissal was polite but firm, and Sarah realized she was going to have to be more persuasive if she wanted to get past the gatekeepers. Sarah pulled out the envelope and carefully extracted Emma's drawing, unfolding it on the reception desk where both women could see it clearly. She explained that Emma had drawn the portrait without ever having met or seen Michael Thompson, and that she believed there was some kind of connection between her daughter and their boss that couldn't be explained by conventional means. As she spoke, she watched the receptionist's expressions change from polite skepticism to genuine surprise. The older receptionist, whose nameplate identified her as Margaret, picked up the drawing and examined it closely. She had worked for Michael Thompson for over 15 years, she told Sarah, and this was definitely his face, captured with an accuracy that was remarkable for any artist, let alone an 18-month-old child. She looked from the drawing to Emma, who was reaching up toward the shiny reception desk with obvious fascination, then back to the drawing with an expression of wonder. Margaret picked up her phone and spoke quietly to someone, presumably Michael, Thompson's assistant, explaining the unusual situation. There was a long pause during which Sarah could hear muffled conversation on the other end of the line. Then Margaret nodded and hung up. Mr. Thompson's assistant would like to see the drawing, she told Sarah, and if he found it as remarkable as they did, she might be able to arrange a brief meeting during his lunch break. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with terror as Margaret led her and Emma to an elevator that required a special key card to access the upper floors. They rose smoothly to the 38th floor, where the executive offices were located, and Sarah found herself in another world of understated luxury and quiet efficiency. The hallway was lined with original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city below. Michael Thompson's assistant, a distinguished man in his 50s named David, greeted them with curiosity and kindness. He studied Emma's drawing for several minutes, asking detailed questions about when and how she had created it. Sarah found herself telling the whole story, from Emma's recent dreams about the nice man to her decision to search for him in the financial district. David listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Emma, who was contentedly playing with a set of wooden blocks that someone had thoughtfully provided. When Sarah finished her story, David was quiet for a long moment, still looking at the drawing. Finally, he told her that Michael Thompson was currently in a board meeting that was expected to run until noon, but that he would show him the drawing as soon as the meeting ended. If Mr. Thompson was available and willing, they might be able to arrange a brief meeting during his lunch hour. In the meantime, he invited Sarah and Emma to wait in a comfortable lounge area where they could relax and Emma could play safely. The next 2 hours felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She tried to keep Emma entertained while fighting off waves of anxiety about what she was doing and why she thought it was a good idea. Part of her wanted to grab the drawing and leave before she embarrassed herself further, but every time she looked at Emma's happy face, she remembered the sense of purpose that had driven her to this point. Whatever was happening between her daughter and Michael Thompson, it felt too important to abandon out of fear. At exactly 12:15, David appeared in the lounge doorway with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. Mr. Thompson, he announced, would like to meet with them immediately. He was fascinated by the drawing and very curious about Emma's unusual artistic abilities. Sarah gathered their things with trembling hands, picked up Emma, and followed David down the hallway toward what she knew would be either the most important or most humiliating encounter of her life. The executive conference room was a study in understated power, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline and a mahogany table that could easily seat 20 people. But as Sarah entered carrying Emma, her attention was immediately drawn to the man standing at the far end of the room, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light streaming through the windows. Even from a distance, she could see that Emma's drawing had captured something essential about Michael Thompson's presence, a quality that went beyond mere physical resemblance. Michael turned as they entered, and Sarah felt her breath catch. The resemblance to Emma's portrait was unmistakable, but seeing him in person revealed layers of character and experience that no drawing could fully capture. His silver-streaked hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his fingers through it during his morning meetings, and there were small stress lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and weighty decisions. Yet when he smiled at the sight of Emma, those same eyes crinkled with genuine warmth, transforming his entire face in a way that made Sarah understand why her daughter had been drawn to him. Emma, who had been unusually quiet during their wait in the lounge, suddenly became animated at the sight of Michael. She began babbling excitedly, reaching her small arms toward him with the kind of immediate recognition that typically occurred only with familiar family members. Sarah had never seen her daughter react so strongly to a stranger, and the intensity of Emma's response sent chills down her spine. It was as if the toddler was greeting someone she had been expecting to see For months, Michael approached them slowly, his expression a mixture of wonder and disbelief as he took in Emma's obvious excitement. David had shown him the drawing during a brief break between meetings, and while Michael had been impressed by the artistic skill displayed by such a young child, he had assumed the resemblance was coincidental. Seeing Emma's immediate recognition of him, however, made it impossible to dismiss what was happening as mere chance. There was something profound occurring that defied logical explanation. Sarah found herself tongue-tied as Michael stopped a few feet away, his attention completely focused on Emma. Her carefully rehearsed explanations seemed inadequate in the face of what was clearly an extraordinary situation. Emma was practically bouncing in her arms, making the soft cooing sounds she typically reserved for her favorite people, and reaching persistently toward Michael with obvious determination. It was as if she was trying to communicate something important that her limited vocabulary couldn't express. Michael extended his hand tentatively toward Emma, and the toddler immediately grasped his finger with both of her small hands, holding on tightly while looking directly into his eyes. The moment their skin made contact, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Michael's expression transformed from curious interest to something approaching awe, as if he was experiencing a recognition that matched Emma's own. Sarah watched in fascination as tears gathered in the corners of his eyes, though he seemed unaware of his emotional response. David quietly excused himself, leaving the three of them alone in the vast conference room. The silence that followed was comfortable rather than awkward, filled with the sense that something significant was unfolding. Michael gently extracted his finger from Emma's grasp and gestured toward the comfortable seating area adjacent to the conference table, suggesting they sit down where they could talk more easily. Emma protested the loss of contact by reaching for him again, making it clear that she had no intention of letting this newly discovered person disappear from her life. As they settled into the leather chairs, with Emma positioned on Sarah's lap where she could maintain visual contact with Michael, Sarah began to tell the complete story of her daughter's unusual artistic abilities and the circumstances that had led them to his office. She spoke about the recent dreams Emma had been having, the way she had drawn his portrait with such accuracy and emotional depth, and her own decision to search for the man in the drawing, despite having no logical reason to believe he was real. Michael listened without interruption, his attention divided between Sarah's narrative and Emma's continued attempts to capture his focus. The toddler had begun what appeared to be an elaborate conversation in her own language, complete with gestures and facial expressions that seemed remarkably sophisticated for someone her age. Occasionally, she would pause as if waiting for a response, then continue with what sounded like detailed explanations about subjects only she understood. When Sarah finished her account, Michael was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing what he had heard. Finally, he shared something that made Sarah's heart race with excitement and apprehension. For the past several weeks, he explained, he had been experiencing unusually vivid dreams about a small child who seemed to need his help. In these dreams, he was always trying to reach a little girl who was just beyond his grasp, calling out to him in a language he couldn't understand but somehow knew was important. The dreams had been so persistent and emotionally intense that Michael had actually consulted his doctor, wondering if they might be related to stress or some underlying health issue. His physician had suggested they were probably the result of his subconscious processing the various children's charities he supported. But Michael had felt certain there was something more specific about the child in his dreams. She had seemed so real, so individual, that he found himself thinking about her during his waking hours and wondering if she was somewhere in the world needing assistance he could provide. As Michael described his dreams, Emma's behavior became even more animated. She began pointing at him and making sounds that, while not quite words, seemed to carry emotional weight and meaning. Sarah found herself wondering if her daughter was somehow trying to confirm that he was indeed the person she had been seeking. The entire situation felt surreal, like something from a fantasy novel rather than real life, yet the evidence was too compelling to dismiss. Michael asked if he could hold Emma, and Sarah hesitated only briefly before transferring her daughter into his arms. Emma settled against him immediately, as if she had been waiting her entire short life for this moment. She placed one small hand against his cheek and began babbling softly, her tone taking on the cadence of someone sharing important confidences. Michael responded instinctively, speaking to her in the gentle voice typically reserved for beloved family members, though he seemed surprised by his own natural ease with the child. Watching them together, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions she struggled to identify. There was relief that her intuition had been correct and that Emma's drawing had led them to someone real rather than an impossible fantasy. But there was also a growing awareness that this encounter might fundamentally change their lives in ways she hadn't fully considered. Michael Thompson wasn't just wealthy and powerful. He was someone who clearly felt a deep connection to Emma that seemed to transcend normal social boundaries. Michael began asking practical questions about Sarah and Emma's living situation, and Sarah found herself being more honest than she had intended about their struggles. She told him about the overdue rent, the turned-off electricity, and her difficulty finding stable employment that would allow her to care for Emma properly. She hadn't planned to share such personal details, but something about Michael's genuine concern and Emma's obvious comfort in his presence made her feel safe being vulnerable. As Sarah spoke, she could see Michael's expression growing increasingly troubled. When she mentioned that they might be evicted within the week, he actually winced as if experiencing physical pain. Emma, still contentedly settled in his arms, seemed to sense the shift in his mood and reached up to pat his face with her small hand, making comforting sounds that were remarkably similar to the ones Sarah used when soothing her daughter's minor upsets. Michael's response to their situation was immediate and decisive in a way that caught Sarah completely off guard. He wanted to help them, he said, not out of pity but because he felt a responsibility that he couldn't fully explain. The connection he felt to Emma was unlike anything he had experienced before, and the idea of her living in unstable conditions was unacceptable to him. He began outlining practical solutions with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving complex problems quickly. First, he would arrange for their rent to be paid current and ensure that their utilities were restored immediately. Sarah started to protest, overwhelmed by the generosity and concerned about accepting such significant help from someone she had just met. But Michael gently interrupted her objections. This wasn't charity, he explained, but rather an investment in something he believed was meant to happen. The circumstances that had brought them together were too extraordinary to ignore, and he felt compelled to act on the connection he felt to Emma. Beyond addressing their immediate housing crisis, Michael wanted to help Sarah find stable employment that would allow her to support herself and Emma independently. He had contacts throughout the city who were always looking for reliable, dedicated employees, and he was confident they could find something that matched her skills and experience, while accommodating her responsibilities as a single mother. The goal wasn't to create dependence, but to provide the foundation she needed to build a secure future for herself and her daughter. Emma had fallen asleep in Michael's arms during their conversation, her small body completely relaxed against his chest as if she had finally found the safety and security she had been seeking. Michael looked down at her with an expression of such tenderness that Sarah felt tears gathering in her own eyes. Here was one of the most powerful men in the city, someone whose decisions affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars in investments, cradling her daughter as if she were precious beyond measure. Sarah's practical nature warred with her growing emotional attachment to this impossible situation. Part of her wanted to accept Michael's help gratefully and allow him to solve their problems with the resources at his disposal. But another part of her worried about what obligations might come with such generosity. and whether accepting assistance from someone so far above her social station would ultimately prove more harmful than helpful. She had worked hard to maintain her independence despite their difficult circumstances, and the idea of becoming dependent on anyone, even someone as seemingly genuine as Michael, frightened her. Michael seemed to sense her internal conflict and addressed her concerns with remarkable insight. He assured her that his offer of help came with no strings attached and no expectations beyond allowing him to maintain contact with Emma. He admitted that he couldn't fully explain the connection he felt to her daughter, but it was profound enough that he wanted to be part of her life in whatever capacity Sarah felt comfortable with. If that meant simply ensuring they had stable housing and adequate resources, he would be satisfied with that level of involvement. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation evolved from practical matters to more personal territory. Michael shared details about his own family, including his grown children who lived in different states and rarely visited. His son worked for a competing firm and seemed to view his father more as a rival than a parent, while his daughter had become so focused on her social obligations and charity work that their interactions felt formal and distant. His wife Linda had her own interests and social circle that rarely intersected with his professional life, and he sometimes felt isolated despite being surrounded by people. Sarah found herself relating to his sense of loneliness, though their circumstances were dramatically different. While she struggled with the practical challenges of single parenthood and financial insecurity, Michael dealt with the emotional isolation that came with extreme success and responsibility. Both of them, she realized, were seeking authentic connection in lives that had become defined by their roles rather than their personalities. Emma seemed to represent something genuine and uncomplicated for both of them, a relationship based on pure emotional resonance rather than obligation or expectation. The conversation was interrupted by David's return, reminding Michael that he had a conference call scheduled with international clients that couldn't be postponed. Michael looked reluctant to end their meeting, particularly since Emma was still sleeping peacefully in his arms, but Sarah could see that he was already late for his professional obligations. She gently took Emma back, trying not to wake her, and prepared to leave with the understanding that they would speak again soon about the practical arrangements he had offered. Before they left, Michael insisted on exchanging phone numbers and asked Sarah to call him that evening so they could finalize the details of helping with their housing situation. He also requested permission to visit them once their living conditions were more stable, explaining that he wanted to see how Emma interacted with him in a more familiar environment. Sarah agreed to both requests, though she still felt somewhat overwhelmed by the rapid pace at which their lives were changing. As David escorted them back to the elevator, Sarah caught a glimpse of Michael through the conference room windows, already engaged in his international call, but frequently glancing in their direction, as if reluctant to let them out of his sight. Emma woke up just as the elevator doors were closing and immediately began looking around for Michael, making distressed sounds when she realized he was no longer with them. Sarah tried to comfort her, promising that they would see the nice man again soon, but Emma remained unsettled until they were back on the street. The walk home gave Sarah time to process what had just occurred and begin planning for the dramatic changes that were about to transform their lives. Michael's offer to help with their immediate housing crisis would provide the stability she had been desperately seeking, but it also marked the beginning of a relationship that was unlike anything she had experienced before. She wasn't sure how to categorize what was developing between Michael and Emma, but it clearly went beyond normal adult-child interaction into territory that was both wonderful and slightly unsettling. That evening, after Emma was fed and settled for the night, Sarah called Michael as promised. Their conversation lasted for over an hour as they worked out the practical details of his assistance and began establishing the boundaries of their unusual relationship. Michael had already contacted her landlord and arranged for all outstanding rent to be paid, as well as a substantial deposit to ensure future security. He had also spoken with the utility companies about restoring their services immediately and had arranged for a grocery delivery service to stock their apartment with everything Emma might need. More importantly, Michael had identified several employment opportunities that might be suitable for Sarah's skills and circumstances. One position in particular seemed promising, working as an administrative coordinator for a nonprofit organization that provided educational services to low-income families. The job would allow her to use her background in early childhood education while maintaining the flexible schedule necessary for caring for Emma. The salary wouldn't make them wealthy, but it would provide the independence Sarah needed to feel secure about their future. As their phone conversation continued, Sarah found herself sharing more personal details about her dreams and aspirations for herself and Emma. Michael listened with the kind of focused attention she hadn't received from anyone in years, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that suggested he understood both her practical concerns and her emotional needs. By the time they ended their call, Sarah felt as if she had gained not just a benefactor, but a genuine friend who cared about their well-being for reasons that transcended financial assistance. The next morning brought a series of service calls that transformed their small apartment from a cold, dark space into something that felt like an actual home. The electricity was restored, filling their rooms with warm light for the first time in days. The heat came back on, eliminating the chill that had become their constant companion. Delivery trucks arrived with groceries, baby supplies, and even some basic furniture that Michael had arranged to make their living space more comfortable and functional. Emma seemed to understand that something significant had changed in their circumstances. She was more animated than she had been in weeks, playing enthusiastically with her toys and babbling happily as she explored their newly comfortable apartment. Most remarkably, she had begun carrying around the drawing she had made of Michael, treating it like a treasured possession that she refused to let out of her sight. Sarah found her daughter looking at the portrait frequently throughout the day, making the soft sound she associated with contentment and satisfaction. Sarah spent the morning filling out employment applications and preparing for the interviews that Michael had arranged for later in the week. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely optimistic about their future and confident that she would be able to provide Emma with the stability and opportunities every child deserved. The transformation in their circumstances felt almost magical, but Sarah was careful to remember that it was also the result of Michael's extraordinary generosity and their mutual commitment to maintaining the connection that Emma had somehow initiated. The interview with the nonprofit organization went better than Sarah had dared to hope. The director, a warm woman named Patricia who had known Michael for several years, was immediately impressed by Sarah's background in early childhood education and her genuine passion for helping families in difficult circumstances. When Sarah explained her own recent struggles and how Michael had connected her with the position, Patricia nodded with understanding rather than judgment, explaining that many of their best employees had personal experience with the challenges their clients faced. The job offer came the same day as the interview, with a starting salary that would allow Sarah to maintain their apartment comfortably while beginning to build savings for Emma's future. Patricia also mentioned that the organization had an excellent child care program for employees' children, which would allow Emma to socialize with other toddlers while receiving early educational enrichment. Everything about the position seemed designed to address Sarah's specific needs and circumstances, though she suspected Michael's influence had played a role in making the opportunity available. When Sarah called Michael that evening to share the good news about her new job, his pleasure and pride in her achievement were evident even over the phone. He insisted that her success was entirely due to her own qualifications and character, though he admitted to having mentioned her situation to Patricia when requesting that she consider Sarah for the position. What mattered most to him, he said, was that Sarah would now have the foundation she needed to build an independent and secure future for herself and Emma. The conversation that evening also included planning for Michael's first visit to their apartment, which he had requested. Once their living situation was more stable, Sarah felt nervous about having someone of his stature in her modest home, but Michael assured her that he was looking forward to seeing Emma in her own environment and learning more about her daily routine and interests. He was particularly curious about whether she would continue drawing portraits or if her artistic focus would shift to other subjects now that she had found the person she had been seeking. The day of Michael's visit arrived with unseasonably warm weather that seemed to mirror Sarah's growing sense that their lives were heading in a positive direction. She had spent the morning cleaning their apartment and preparing a simple lunch, though she suspected Michael was accustomed to far more elaborate cuisine than anything she could provide. Emma seemed to sense that something special was happening, and had been unusually well behaved all morning, as if she wanted to make a good impression on their important visitor. When Michael arrived, carrying a bag of toys and books that he had carefully selected for Emma's age and developmental stage, the toddler's reaction was immediate and joyful. She ran to him with arms outstretched, demanding to be picked up and chattering excitedly in her own language while showing him around their small apartment. Michael responded to her enthusiasm with obvious delight, allowing her to guide him through their home and explain each toy and picture with the seriousness of a museum curator providing a personal tour. Watching them interact in her own space, Sarah was struck by how natural and comfortable their relationship seemed. Michael had clearly spent time learning about toddler development and communication, asking Emma questions that encouraged her growing vocabulary and engaging with her games in ways that demonstrated genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Emma, for her part, seemed to view Michael as a beloved family member who had simply been absent for a while, but was now available for all the attention and affection she had been saving up. Lunch was a relaxed affair during which Emma insisted on sharing her food with Michael, offering him bites of her sandwich and sips of her juice with the generous hospitality that characterized her personality. Michael accepted each offering graciously, praising her kindness and engaging in the kind of gentle conversation that parents typically had with their toddlers. Sarah found herself marveling at how easily he had adapted to Emma's world setting aside his corporate persona to become simply someone who cared about a little girl's happiness. After lunch, Emma retrieved her drawing materials and insisted that Michael sit beside her while she worked on a new portrait. This time, however, she seemed determined to draw Sarah, glancing up frequently to study her mother's face before returning to her paper with focused concentration. Michael watched the process with fascination, occasionally offering gentle encouragement, but mostly simply observing as Emma created another remarkably sophisticated portrait for someone her age. The new drawing, while not quite as detailed as her portrait of Michael, captured Sarah's essential features with impressive accuracy. Emma had somehow managed to convey her mother's warmth and strength, creating an image that looked like Sarah, but also suggested qualities that might not be immediately apparent to casual observers. When she finished, Emma proudly showed the drawing to Michael, who praised her artistic abilities while exchanging a meaningful look with Sarah over the toddler's head. As the afternoon progressed, Michael shared more details about his own family situation and the growing distance he felt from his adult children and wife. His son's competitive attitude toward his father's business success had created a rift that seemed to widen each year, while his daughter's focus on social obligations left little time for meaningful family connection. His wife had her own interests and social circle that rarely included him, and their marriage had become more of a business partnership than an emotional bond. Sarah found herself offering perspective and encouragement based on her own experience with difficult family relationships and the challenges of maintaining connections across generational and lifestyle differences. She suggested that his children might be struggling with their own expectations and pressures, and that the emotional distance he perceived might be their way of trying to establish independence rather than rejection of their relationship with him. Her insights, drawn from her studies in child development and her own navigation of complex family dynamics, seemed to resonate with Michael in ways that his expensive consultants and therapists had not achieved. The visit stretched into early evening, with Michael showing no inclination to leave and Emma clearly unwilling to let him go. When he finally mentioned that he should probably head home, Emma's immediate distress was evident. She clung to his leg and began making the soft whimpering sounds that indicated genuine upset rather than mere disappointment. Michael knelt down to her level and promised that he would visit again soon, but Emma seemed unconvinced by his assurances. Sarah found herself inviting Michael to stay for dinner, an offer that surprised them both with its spontaneity and naturalness. Michael accepted gratefully, explaining that he typically ate alone or at business functions where conversation was limited to professional topics. The prospect of sharing a simple family meal with people who genuinely enjoyed his company was more appealing than any fancy restaurant or exclusive club dinner he had attended in recent memory. Dinner was an intimate affair around Sarah's small table, with Emma positioned between the two adults where she could maintain contact with both of them throughout the meal. The conversation flowed easily between personal topics and broader subjects, with Michael asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's educational background and future goals, while sharing stories about his own journey from a small family business to international corporation. Emma contributed to the conversation in her own way, offering commentary that seemed remarkably appropriate, even though most of her words were still unintelligible to adult ears. After dinner, as they cleaned up together while Emma played nearby, Sarah found herself wondering how this unusual relationship would evolve and what role Michael would ultimately play in their lives. He had already transformed their immediate circumstances and provided the foundation for their future security. But his continued presence suggested he was seeking something more than the satisfaction of having helped them solve their practical problems. There was a genuine affection developing between him and Emma that seemed to fulfill emotional needs for both of them. When Michael finally left that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in his arms and had to be carefully transferred to her crib, Sarah felt as if their small family had somehow expanded to include someone who had become essential to their happiness. The apartment seemed quieter without his presence, and she found herself already looking forward to his next visit. Emma woke up several times during the night, seeming to search for Michael before settling back to sleep, confirming that his impact on their lives extended far beyond financial assistance. The relationship that developed over the following weeks defied easy categorization, but felt natural and right to everyone involved. Michael began visiting regularly, timing his appearances to coincide with Emma's most active and social periods. He brought books and educational toys that challenged her, developing cognitive abilities while never overwhelming her with expectations beyond her developmental stage. More importantly, he provided the kind of consistent, loving attention that helped Emma thrive emotionally and intellectually. Sarah's new job at the nonprofit organization proved to be exactly the right fit for her skills and interests. She found genuine satisfaction in helping other families navigate the challenges she had recently faced herself, and her personal experience with financial instability and single parenthood gave her credibility and empathy that her clients immediately recognized. Patricia became not just a supervisor, but a mentor who helped Sarah develop professional skills while maintaining the flexibility she needed to care for Emma properly. Emma's artistic abilities continued to develop at an extraordinary pace, though. Her subjects had expanded beyond portraits to include elaborate scenes that seemed to tell stories only she understood. Michael encouraged her creativity while also introducing her to other forms of expression, bringing musical instruments and dance videos that helped her explore different ways of communicating her thoughts and feelings. Her vocabulary was expanding rapidly, and she had begun using Michael's name consistently, though she typically called him Mike in a way that made him smile every time. The transformation in Michael's own demeanor was apparent to everyone who knew him professionally. David commented that his boss seemed more relaxed and genuinely happy than he had appeared in years, approaching both business decisions and personal interactions with renewed energy and optimism. Michael's wife Linda had noticed the change as well, though she attributed it to some new business success rather than his developing relationship with Sarah and Emma. His adult children remained largely unaware of the new people in his life, though Michael had begun considering how and when to introduce them to this unusual family connection. As winter gave way to spring, the relationship between Michael, Sarah, and Emma had evolved into something that felt like an extended family arrangement. Michael's visits had become a regular part of their weekly routine, and Emma had begun expressing disappointment and concern whenever more than a few days passed without seeing him. Sarah had grown comfortable, accepting his friendship and support while maintaining her independence and decision-making authority regarding Emma's care and future. The bond between Michael and Emma continued to deepen in ways that sometimes surprised even them. Emma had begun drawing pictures specifically for Michael, creating portraits of the three of them together that suggested she viewed him as a permanent part of their family unit. Michael had started referring to her as his honorary granddaughter, though the relationship felt more immediate and personal than that label implied. They had developed their own games and rituals that made their time together special and memorable. For both of them, Sarah found herself grateful not just for the practical assistance Michael had provided, but for the emotional support and genuine friendship he had brought into their lives. Having another adult who cared deeply about Emma's well-being and development had made the challenges of single parenthood feel manageable rather than overwhelming. Michael's perspective and experience complemented her own intuition and knowledge, creating a collaborative approach to Emma's care that benefited everyone involved. Looking toward the future, Sarah felt optimistic about their prospects in ways she hadn't dared to hope for during their darkest period. Emma would grow up with security, opportunity, and the knowledge that she was loved by multiple adults who were committed to her happiness and success. Sarah herself had found not just stable employment, but a career path that utilized her education and passion for helping families. Michael had discovered a source of joy and purpose that had been missing from his life despite all his professional achievements and material success. The drawing that had started everything remained carefully preserved in a frame on Sarah's dresser, serving as a reminder of the mysterious forces that had brought them together and the importance of remaining open to unexpected possibilities. Emma still looked at it occasionally, though she seemed more interested in creating new artwork that documented their evolving relationship and shared experiences. The portrait had served its purpose as a bridge between their separate worlds, and now they were building something new together that belonged uniquely to them. The spring sunshine filtered through the windows of the nonprofit organization where Sarah had been working for 3 months, casting warm patterns across her desk. As she reviewed case files for families needing educational support, her position as administrative coordinator had evolved beyond her initial expectations, with Patricia increasingly relying on her insights and experience to help develop new programs for single parents facing similar challenges to those Sarah had recently overcome. The work felt meaningful in ways that went far beyond the steady paycheck and benefits that had stabilized their lives. Emma had adapted beautifully to the organization's childcare program, forming friendships with other toddlers while continuing to develop her remarkable artistic abilities under the guidance of Miss Carmen, a former art teacher who volunteered with the children's program. The 2-year-old's vocabulary had expanded dramatically, and she had begun creating elaborate stories to accompany her drawings, weaving narratives that often featured the 3 important adults in her life in various adventures and scenarios that reflected her growing understanding of relationships and family dynamics. Michael's regular visits had become such an integral part of their routine that Emma had begun marking days on a simple calendar that Sarah had created for her, placing stickers on the dates when Mike was scheduled to come see them. His presence had brought stability and joy that extended far beyond the material improvements he had facilitated, providing Emma with a consistent male figure who celebrated her achievements and offered comfort during difficult moments. The bond between them had deepened into something that resembled a grandfather-granddaughter relationship, though the circumstances of their connection remained unique and special. The peaceful rhythm of their new life was disrupted on a Tuesday morning in late April when Sarah received an unexpected phone call at work. The caller identified herself as Linda Thompson, Michael's wife, and her tone carried a mixture of curiosity and underlying tension that immediately put Sarah on guard. Linda explained that she had recently learned about Michael's involvement with Sarah and Emma, and she wanted to meet to discuss the situation that had developed between her husband and their small family. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with anxiety as she agreed to meet Linda for coffee the following day. She had known that Michael's family would eventually become aware of their relationship, but she had hoped for more time to establish the normalcy and appropriateness of their connection before facing scrutiny from his wife. Michael had mentioned that his marriage had become distant and formal over the years, but Sarah had no idea how Linda might interpret his attachment to Emma or what concerns she might have about the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. That evening, Sarah called Michael to let him know about Linda's contact and their planned meeting. She could hear the tension in his voice as he apologized for what he assumed would be an uncomfortable conversation and assured her that he would speak with his wife about respecting the boundaries of their friendship. Michael explained that Linda had discovered their relationship through his calendar, where David had been scheduling his visits to see Emma alongside his business appointments, and that she had demanded details about people she viewed as strangers who were taking up significant amounts of her husband's time. Michael's obvious distress about the situation made Sarah realize how much their friendship meant to him and how concerned he was about protecting it from external interference. He had found something precious in his relationship with Emma that he was unwilling to sacrifice to maintain peace in a marriage that had long since lost its emotional intimacy. At the same time, Sarah understood that Linda's concerns were not unreasonable, given that her husband was spending considerable time and emotional energy on a woman and child she had never met under circumstances that must seem strange and potentially threatening. The coffee shop where Sarah met Linda Thompson was an upscale establishment in the financial district, the kind of place where business deals were discussed over artisanal beverages and conversations were conducted in carefully modulated tones. Linda arrived precisely on time, and Sarah recognized her immediately from photographs in Michael's office, though seeing her in person revealed a refined elegance and subtle authority that hadn't been apparent in the pictures. She was beautifully dressed in a way that suggested both wealth and taste, and her manner conveyed the confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in any situation. Linda's initial approach was polite but coolly professional, as if she were conducting a business meeting rather than a personal conversation. She thanked Sarah for agreeing to meet and explained that she wanted to understand the nature of the relationship that had developed between Michael and Sarah's family. Her questions were carefully phrased but probing, seeking details about how they had met, what Michael's involvement with Emma entailed, and what Sarah's expectations were regarding the continuation of their unusual friendship. Sarah answered Linda's questions honestly, describing Emma's mysterious artistic abilities, their desperate circumstances at the time of their first meeting, and the way Michael had generously helped them achieve stability while developing a genuine affection for Emma. She emphasized that their relationship was based on Michael's connection to her daughter rather than any romantic interest, and that she had no financial expectations beyond the assistance he had already provided to help them become self-sufficient. As the conversation progressed, Linda's demeanor began to shift from formal interrogation to something approaching genuine curiosity. She admitted that she had never seen Michael as animated and engaged as he had become in recent months. that while she had initially attributed the change to some new business venture, learning about Emma had provided a more plausible explanation. Linda described how Michael had seemed more present and emotionally available in their limited interactions, though she acknowledged that their marriage had become more of a partnership of convenience than a source of personal fulfillment for either of them. The turning point in their conversation came when Sarah shared some of Emma's artwork, including the original portrait that had led them to Michael and several more recent drawings that featured all three adults in various family scenarios. Linda studied the pictures with obvious amazement, recognizing both the technical skill they represented and the emotional themes they explored. The drawings clearly showed Emma's perception of Sarah, Michael, and Linda as interconnected parts of her world, with each adult playing distinct but important roles in her developing understanding of relationships and family structure. Linda's response to the artwork was unexpectedly emotional, revealing vulnerabilities that her polished exterior had concealed. She spoke about her own struggles with feeling disconnected from meaningful relationships, including her marriage, to Michael and her relationships with their adult children who lived their own independent lives in distant cities. Her social obligations and charitable work provided structure and purpose, but she often felt that she was performing roles rather than experiencing genuine connections with others. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Linda asked if she could meet Emma, explaining that she was curious about the child who had somehow managed to reach parts of Michael's personality that had been dormant for years. Sarah felt surprised by the request but agreed to arrange a meeting, though she warned Linda that Emma could be shy with new people and might need time to warm up to someone unfamiliar. Linda assured her that she was comfortable with children and had experience from her volunteer work with various educational and cultural organizations. The meeting between Linda and Emma was arranged for the following Saturday at Sarah's apartment, with Michael present to help facilitate introductions and provide continuity for Emma's comfort. Sarah spent the morning preparing Emma for the visit, explaining that they would be meeting Mike's wife and encouraging her to share some of her artwork if she felt comfortable doing so. Emma seemed excited about the prospect of meeting another new person, especially someone connected to her beloved Mike, and she carefully selected several of her favorite drawings to show their visitor. Linda arrived bearing gifts that revealed considerable thought and research into appropriate toys for Emma's age and developmental stage. She had brought books with interactive elements that would engage Emma's growing language skills, art supplies that would expand her creative possibilities, and a small musical instrument that reflected her understanding of the toddler's interest in multiple forms of expression. Emma responded positively to Linda's gentle approach and obvious respect for her intelligence and personality. The afternoon proceeded more smoothly than any of the adults had anticipated, with Emma gradually warming to Linda's presence and beginning to share her artwork and stories with increasing enthusiasm. Linda proved to be naturally gifted at communicating with children, asking questions that encouraged Emma to elaborate on her drawings, while showing genuine interest in the complex narratives that accompanied each picture. Michael watched the interaction with obvious relief and growing hope that his wife might understand and accept the importance of his relationship with Emma. Linda's artistic background, which she had pursued before marriage and family responsibilities, had redirected her focus, provided common ground for connecting with Emma's creative interests. She was able to offer suggestions and encouragement that built on Emma's natural abilities while introducing new techniques and concepts that challenged her growing skills. The two of them spent a significant portion of the afternoon working together on a collaborative drawing that incorporated both of their artistic perspectives and created something that neither could have achieved alone. As the visit progressed, Sarah observed Linda interacting with Michael in ways that suggested a rekindling of the affection and mutual respect that had originally brought them together. Watching Michael with Emma seemed to remind Linda of qualities in her husband that had been overshadowed by years of business pressures and social obligations. The gentle patience he showed with the toddler and the genuine joy he took in her achievements revealed aspects of his personality that Linda had perhaps forgotten or taken for granted during their long marriage. The conversation among the three adults, conducted while Emma played nearby, gradually moved from careful politeness to more genuine sharing of perspectives and experiences. Linda spoke about her own sense of disconnection from meaningful relationships and her growing awareness that material success and social status had not provided the fulfillment she had expected when she was younger. Sarah shared her journey from struggling single mother to stable independence, while Michael reflected on how his relationship with Emma had helped him rediscover priorities and sources of satisfaction that he had neglected in his pursuit of business achievements. Emma's behavior throughout the afternoon provided a fascinating glimpse into her developing social awareness and emotional intelligence. She seemed to understand instinctively that this meeting was important to the adults in her life, and she made obvious efforts to include Linda in activities and conversations while maintaining her close connection to both Sarah and Michael. Her artistic work during Linda's visit reflected themes of inclusion and expansion, suggesting that she was already beginning to envision Linda as part of their extended family network. The success of the initial meeting led to Linda becoming a regular part of their gatherings, though her participation was initially tentative and carefully bounded by her other obligations. She began joining them for some of Michael's visits, bringing her own perspective and interest to their activities while learning to appreciate the simple pleasures of spending time with a curious and affectionate toddler. Emma responded enthusiastically to having another adult who was interested in her development and willing to engage with her creative projects and imaginative games. Linda's growing involvement with Emma also began to create positive changes in her relationship with Michael, as they found themselves working together to plan activities and discuss Emma's development in ways that rekindled their ability to collaborate and communicate effectively. Their shared interest in Emma's well-being provided common ground that had been missing from their marriage for several years, giving them opportunities to rediscover each other's strengths and perspectives while contributing to something meaningful and rewarding. The expansion of their unusual family arrangement was not without challenges, however. Linda's social circle and charitable obligations sometimes conflicted with the time she wanted to spend with Emma, creating scheduling complexities that required careful negotiation and compromise. Some of Linda's friends expressed confusion and concern about her attachment to a child who was not related to her, questioning whether such involvement was appropriate or sustainable given the differences in their social and economic circumstances. More significantly, Michael and Linda's adult children became aware of their parents' involvement with Sarah and Emma through family conversations and social media posts that Linda had begun sharing. Their responses ranged from puzzled concern to outright disapproval, with both children questioning whether their parents were making wise decisions about their time, energy, and emotional investments. The criticism was particularly difficult for Linda, who had worked hard to maintain close relationships with her children despite their geographical distance and busy professional lives. Michael's son Robert expressed the most vocal opposition to their involvement with Sarah and Emma, viewing it as an inappropriate deviation from family obligations and questioning whether his father was being manipulated by a young woman seeking financial advantage. Robert's competitive relationship with his father had always made him suspicious of Michael's decisions, but his criticism of the relationship with Emma felt more personal and hurtful than their typical business disagreements. Michael found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending choices that felt intuitively right, but were difficult to explain rationally. Linda's daughter Jennifer was more diplomatically critical, expressing concern about her parents' emotional investment in a relationship that might prove temporary or problematic over time. Jennifer worried that her parents were substituting involvement with Emma for the family relationships they had neglected, and she feared that they might be hurt if Sarah decided to limit their access to her daughter, or if the unusual circumstances that had brought them together proved less sustainable than they currently appeared. The external pressures and family criticism created stress for everyone involved, but they also served to clarify the importance and value of the relationships that had developed. Michael and Linda found themselves defending their connection to Emma, not just to their children, but to themselves, articulating the ways in which their involvement with her had enriched their lives and provided meaning that their other activities and relationships had not achieved. Sarah struggled with guilt about potentially causing problems within Michael's family, while also recognizing the genuine benefits that his and Linda's involvement had brought to Emma's development and their overall well-being. Emma, despite her young age, seemed to sense the tension surrounding their relationships and began creating artwork that reflected themes of protection and loyalty. Her drawings during this period often featured the adults in her life standing together against various threats or challenges, suggesting that she understood on some level that their connection was precious and needed to be preserved. Her emotional intelligence and artistic expression provided a powerful reminder of what was at stake and why the relationships were worth defending against external criticism. The crisis came to a head during a family gathering that Michael and Linda had arranged to introduce Sarah and Emma to their adult children, hoping that meeting Emma in person would help Robert and Jennifer understand the significance of their involvement with her. The evening was carefully planned to be casual and non-threatening, with activities designed to showcase Emma's personality and artistic abilities while allowing everyone to interact in a relaxed setting. The gathering took place at Michael and Linda's home, a sprawling estate that impressed Sarah with its elegance and sophistication while making her acutely aware of the differences in their social circumstances. Emma was initially overwhelmed by the grandeur of the surroundings, but quickly became fascinated by the art collection and architectural details that provided new visual stimulation for her developing aesthetic sensibilities. She had prepared a special drawing as a gift for Robert and Jennifer, working for days to create a portrait that included all the important adults in her life in a scene that conveyed harmony and mutual affection. Robert's initial interaction with Emma was stiff and uncomfortable, reflecting his skepticism about the entire situation and his assumption that the meeting was designed to manipulate his emotions. He seemed determined to maintain his critical stance and avoid being charmed by Emma's obvious intelligence and artistic abilities. Jennifer was more open but cautious, engaging with Emma politely while clearly evaluating the appropriateness and sustainability of her parents' attachment to the child. Emma's response to the mixed reception was remarkable for its emotional sophistication and resilience. Rather than being intimidated by Robert's coolness or discouraged by Jennifer's reservations, she seemed to understand that she needed to demonstrate her worthiness of their parents' affection and attention. She shared her artwork with patience and enthusiasm, explaining her creative process and the stories behind her drawings with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing she is genuinely valued and supported. The turning point came when Emma presented her special gift drawing to Robert and Jennifer, explaining in her developing vocabulary that she had made it especially for them because they were important to Mike and Linda. The portrait showed remarkable insight into family dynamics, depicting Robert and Jennifer as protective figures standing alongside their parents in a scene that conveyed both strength and unity. Emma's ability to see and represent their potential roles in her life, despite their initial resistance, demonstrated an emotional intelligence that was impossible to dismiss or ignore. Robert's defenses began to crumble as he watched Emma's patient efforts to connect with him and her obvious hurt when her overtures were repeatedly rebuffed. Jennifer was more quickly won over by Emma's combination of vulnerability and strength, recognizing in the toddler qualities that reminded her of her own childhood and the importance of having adults who believed in her potential. Both siblings gradually found themselves engaging more naturally with Emma as the evening progressed, though Robert maintained his reservations about the long-term implications of their parents' involvement. The evening concluded with cautious acceptance rather than enthusiastic endorsement, but it established a foundation for ongoing relationships that could potentially grow stronger over time. Robert agreed to keep an open mind about his parents' choices, while continuing to monitor the situation for potential problems or complications. Jennifer expressed willingness to get to know Emma better and to support her parents' involvement, as long as appropriate boundaries were maintained and everyone's interests were protected. The successful navigation of family opposition marked a significant milestone in the development of their extended family arrangement, confirming that the relationships were strong enough to withstand external pressure and criticism. Michael and Linda felt validated in their choice to prioritize their connection with Emma, while Sarah gained confidence that their unusual situation could be sustained and integrated into their broader social and family networks. Emma's role in facilitating acceptance and understanding among the adults in her life demonstrated the power of authentic connection to transcend social barriers and conventional expectations. Her artistic abilities had initially brought them together, but her personality and emotional intelligence had sustained and deepened their relationships in ways that continued to surprise and delight everyone involved. The challenges they had faced and overcome together had strengthened their bonds and clarified their commitment to maintaining their connection despite external pressures. As spring turned to summer, their extended family had evolved into something that felt both unusual and completely natural. Emma had gained not just stability and security, but a network of adults who were invested in her development and happiness in ways that went far beyond obligation or convenience. Sarah had found not just employment and financial stability, but genuine friendship and support from people who understood and valued her strength and dedication as a mother. Michael and Linda had rediscovered sources of meaning and connection that had been missing from their lives for years, finding in their relationship with Emma opportunities to nurture and contribute that satisfied deep emotional needs that their other activities had not addressed. Their marriage had been renewed and strengthened by their shared commitment to Emma's well-being, providing common ground for collaboration and mutual respect that had been absent for too long. The summer brought new adventures and deepening relationships as they explored activities and experiences that took advantage of the resources and opportunities available to their expanded family. Michael arranged for Emma to visit his office during quiet periods where she delighted the staff with her artwork and obvious affection for their boss. Linda began including Emma in some of her charitable activities, introducing her to cultural events and educational programs that broadened her horizons while showcasing her remarkable abilities to others who could appreciate and encourage her development. Emma's artistic work during this period reflected the security and happiness she had found in her expanded family relationships. Her drawings became more complex and sophisticated, incorporating multiple figures and elaborate scenes that told stories of adventure, protection, and mutual care. She had begun experimenting with different media and techniques, guided by Linda's artistic background and encouraged by Michael's willingness to invest in high-quality materials and instruction. The bond between Emma and Linda had developed into something that resembled a grandmother-granddaughter relationship, with Linda taking particular pleasure in Emma's cultural and educational development. She arranged for Emma to attend children's concerts and art exhibitions, exposing her to experiences that would have been impossible without her involvement and support. Emma responded to these opportunities with enthusiasm and curiosity, demonstrating an appreciation for beauty and creativity that delighted Linda and confirmed her belief in the importance of early exposure to arts and culture. Michael's relationship with Emma continued to provide him with joy and fulfillment that transcended his business achievements and material success. He had begun incorporating visits with Emma into his travel schedule when possible, bringing her small gifts and souvenirs that reflected his growing understanding of her interests and preferences. Emma had started asking questions about his work and expressing interest in the business world that had consumed so much of his time and energy, though her perspective was refreshingly focused on the people and relationships involved rather than the financial aspects that typically dominated such discussions. Sarah's professional development had accelerated as a result of the stability and support she had gained through her relationships with Michael and Linda. Her insights and experience had led to increased responsibilities at the nonprofit organization, including opportunities to speak at conferences and contribute to publications focused on supporting single parents and vulnerable families. Her personal transformation from struggling single mother to confident professional had become an inspiration to the clients she served and a source of pride for the extended family that had helped make her success possible. The summer also brought unexpected opportunities for travel and adventure as Michael and Linda invited Sarah and Emma to join them for weekend trips and vacation experiences that broadened everyone's horizons while strengthening their relationships. Emma's first airplane ride was a source of excitement and wonder that she documented in a series of drawings that captured both the technical marvels of flight and the emotional significance of sharing the experience with her chosen family. These shared adventures provided opportunities for all the adults to see each other in new contexts and circumstances, deepening their understanding and appreciation of each other's strengths and perspectives. Michael revealed a playful side that his business associates rarely saw, while Linda demonstrated a spontaneity and sense of humor that had been suppressed by years of formal social obligations. Sarah proved to be an ideal travel companion, adaptable and resourceful while maintaining her focus on Emma's needs and comfort. Emma's behavior during these trips showcased her developing social skills and emotional intelligence as she learned to navigate new environments while maintaining connections with all the important adults in her life. Her ability to adapt to different situations while preserving her core personality and interests impressed everyone and confirmed their belief in her resilience and potential for future success. The stability and happiness of their unusual family arrangement attracted positive attention from others who recognized the benefits of the relationships that had developed. Patricia, Sarah's supervisor, often commented on the positive changes in Sarah's confidence and professional capabilities, attributing much of her growth to the support and encouragement she had received from Michael and Linda, Emma's teachers. At the childcare program, marveled at her artistic abilities and social development, noting the security and self-confidence that came from knowing she was valued and supported by multiple adults who were invested in her well-being. As autumn approached, their extended family had established routines and traditions that felt both sustainable and deeply satisfying to everyone involved. Emma's artistic development continued to progress at an extraordinary pace with her work, becoming increasingly sophisticated and emotionally nuanced. Her ability to capture not just physical likenesses, but personality traits and emotional states in her portraits had developed to the point where her artwork served as a form of communication that complemented her expanding vocabulary and social skills. The relationships among the adults had deepened into genuine friendship and mutual support that extended beyond their shared focus on Emma's welfare. Michael and Linda had found in Sarah a friend whose perspective and experience enriched their understanding of the world while challenging them to consider priorities and values they had sometimes taken for granted. Sarah had gained not just mentors and supporters, but genuine friends who valued her insights and contributions while respecting her independence and decision-making authority. Looking toward the future, all of them felt optimistic about the continued development of their relationships and Emma's growth into the remarkable person she was already becoming. The challenges they had faced and overcome together had strengthened their bonds and demonstrated their commitment to maintaining connections that had proved more valuable than any of them had initially imagined. Emma's mysterious artistic gift had brought them together, but their genuine care for each other had created something lasting and meaningful, that would continue to enrich all their lives for years to come. 2 years later, Emma stood in the center of the Children's Art Gallery at the prestigious Riverside Cultural Center. Her latest painting displayed prominently behind her as reporters and art critics gathered around. At 3.5 years old, she had become the youngest artist ever to have a solo exhibition, with proceeds benefiting the nonprofit organization where Sarah now served as executive director. Michael and Linda watched proudly from the side as Emma confidently explained her artwork to fascinated visitors, her vocabulary now sophisticated enough to discuss color theory and emotional expression. Sarah stood nearby, elegant and a designer dress that Linda had insisted on buying for the occasion, fielding interview requests from journalists amazed by their family's extraordinary story. The centerpiece of the exhibition was Emma's newest portrait series titled My Family, featuring individual paintings of Sarah, Michael, Linda, Robert, and Jennifer. Each portrait captured not just physical features but the essence of their relationships and the love that had grown between them. Robert, now one of Emma's most devoted supporters, had flown in specifically for the opening, while Jennifer had helped coordinate the media coverage through her public relations firm. Emma had insisted on creating a special painting for the opening night, a group portrait showing all of them, together in the garden of Michael and Linda's home, where they gathered every Sunday for family dinners. The painting radiated warmth and belonging, a testament to how a mysterious drawing by a toddler had transformed 5 separate lives into one unbreakable family. As the evening wound down, Emma ran to each of her adults, hugging them tightly and thanking them for being her family. Michael knelt down to her level, his eyes bright with tears of joy as he whispered, "Thank you for finding us, little artist. Thank you for bringing us all home." The mysterious connection that had started with a simple drawing had created something far greater than any of them could have imagined, proving that sometimes the most impossible dreams are just waiting for the right moment to come true. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.